Welcome back to another episode of Focus State. Today I'm joined by my colleague Oscar. Hey Oscar.
Hey Frederick,
Nice to see you.
nice to see you.
Today we're going to talk a bit about branding, but more specifically we're going to talk about, I think that like a way that we like to practice branding, at least for some of the most recent projects we've been doing, pragmatic branding. When I think about pragmatic branding, I think about resourcefulness.
Mm-hmm.
I think about like approaching branding, because the branding effort and the whole process of defining your brand and establishing your brand and then executing on your brand can be very time consuming and can be very resourceful process. So having a pragmatic look at branding is for me resourcefulness, as I mentioned, but also just being aware of like the end goal, like what do you want your branding to help you achieve? That being brand awareness or more signups or something completely else. But generally speaking, being pragmatic about branding for me is that, just being aware and then not putting too much effort, at least unnecessary effort into it.
Yeah.
At least initially.
I definitely agree. It's all about being intentional and realistic with your efforts and defining what you want to achieve with branding.
Exactly. Yeah, being realistic about it.
Yeah.
Setting some goals potentially also to make sure we hit those targets. So what do you think in terms of when we talk software companies and startups in general? I think that's very interesting, but we could talk whatever you feel like talking about. But what do you think makes pragmatic, like this branding pragmatic? Is that just selecting some colors and defining a logo or designing a logo, or what? Like, where do you see that level?
I think especially in software companies, it's all about brand consistency and making the product usable for their users. So working around that is not so much focusing on aesthetics of the product, but what the product communicates and how it operates, and being pragmatic about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if we want to talk about a few a few examples of some of our recent work too, but I think we have quite a few good examples of that being pragmatic. I don't know if there's anything comes to mind.
We could talk about the branding we did for Pragmatic and
Yes.
how we established a tone of voice and a visual language around their core brand values, being communication, collaboration, and either like uniting,
Yes.
like collectiveness.
Yes, exactly.
So we really tapped into the storytelling aspect of the branding, how we speak directly to the core functions of the product.
Exactly. Yeah, the audience.
The audience, yes.
Because Pragmatic has a lot of different audiences too, which is kind of interesting. Whereas in terms of branding for some companies, it might be very direct to a certain type of consumer, for example. In Pragmatic's example, we have like three very distinct groups of different people who want to use it and understand Pragmatic differently.
Yes.
The tenant and the property manager and the property owners. Different perspectives.
Yeah.
And creating like a brand that gets everybody involved and excited is very difficult. But I think we did that very nicely in that case with the storytelling, with the big city. And
yeah, so we had the city that kind of speaks to the tenants, the problem solving aspect in the hero section of our website.
Exactly.
That speaks to property owners or property managers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We had all those bubbles like showing UI like features.
Yes.
Like on the city, on the properties, and then we added some text bubbles later too. Like we did a lot of exploring in that scene. We spent a lot of time figuring out exactly how to get it right, what to communicate. I think that's a great example. Also, speaking of like how you create a strong brand presence initially working with a startup or scale up or any type of smaller company without like going insane budget wise. Like in your mind, and I think Prabhat is a good example of this, but in your mind, what do you think is like to create this strong brand presence without blowing the budget initially when we think about branding?
Yeah, it's definitely all about defining the core foundations, the ones we just talked about, the brand messaging, its mission, the values, and really defining what the brand stands for,
Yeah.
and then just using that to build on top of it,
Mm-hmm.
because being fixated on I don't know, a logo or whatever, it doesn't really make sense in for a company on that scale yet. But if you have those core elements defined, then you can build on top and just evolve the brand as you grow.
Yes. Yeah, because you mentioned storytelling. We talked a bit about that in other podcast episodes too. But the storytelling aspect, especially when you're like just starting out or you're fairly unknown or you just want to tap into a very crowded market, can sometimes be the thing that kind of really differentiates you because it shows you clearly know your target audience, right?
Mhm.
And you're able to speak to that. And I think PropBiner does that very well. Talking about when companies grow, you mentioned it just now too. Like, how do you view a brand? Because it's created at some point, like it's defined initially at some point, and then it's kind of done or we launch it. How do you see a brand grow together with a company? Like when it goes from a startup to scale up to a more established company, or just in general, a very established company just staying consistent
Mm.
and using the same brand year over year? Like, how do you see that brand in general growing with any sort of company?
No, I think generally speaking, a good brand evolves with the company,
Mm.
so that it adapts to um I don't know, the current market, the current trends, even in a way that is still respectable to the brand. Like it's not that it's still you. Like
Mm.
the core elements always should always remain the same. However, the how maybe you could adapt your tone of voice slightly, or maybe use something that's currently happening to tap into that to reach a wider audience.
Yeah.
Essentially, just yeah, adapting and evolving with as you grow.
Yeah, as you grow. But also at least in the tech space, there's a lot of like pivoting. Like there's a lot of change sometimes happening. As you grow, you figure out that, or what we initially thought was like our calling or our mission kind of slightly changes maybe as you get people on board using your product. So it also, I think, relates a bit to like the technology you're building, that you're setting out to build this thing, but you design a brand around that, but you maybe at some point realizes that, oh, this is not us anyway, or we need to go more broad, or we need to go more niche. Um, do we have any examples, do you think, in terms of some of our recent projects? I know we not necessarily related to this, but in terms of like a company like Backstage that we worked with recently, do you have any, when you think of that process we went through, like could you put some words in like that process in terms of how we got from like the initial state to finishing off the rebrand?
Right. So, what helped us a lot was a workshop that Christian, a marketing guy from Backstage, has defined what what Backstage is and what
Mm.
they stand for. Where do they see themselves in comparing to their competitors?
Yes.
So he did the sexy grown up scale where he positioned in their opinion he put their position their competitors and their position themselves around that to kind of help them visualize what they might look like as a brand,
Yes.
and seeing that to us was very valuable because we could quickly identify the elements that they would like to tap into in order for them to um, be more mature and sexy
Yeah.
in that space
Yes.
consultancy.
Yeah, and attract the right clients, right? I
Exactly.
speak to them.
Speak to the right clients, the clients that they really like to attract.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very helpful. Like all the pre-work. Also, one thing is where they were right now because it was a rebrand to some extent. So like where they are right now and where they would like to like be, like in the eyes of their clients on this diagram, on this chart they made at the workshop, which was very valuable. Um, Making sure like where do we want to go with it? Like there's also with we don't want to be too techy. We want to be human, but we also want to be
A little playful.
exactly,
Yeah,
but not too playful.
yeah, not too serious, not so serious, but somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, like visualizing that on that scale was really helpful for us to kind of establish a visual identity that really speaks to them as a brand and stands for the same values.
For sure. And when you look at, do you see any, not related to backstage, but when you, once the brand is kind of established, there's a lot of marketing and sales activity around it, of course, because you kind of need to use the brand now. Do you see any consistent, or when inconsistencies happen, which they usually do, like at some point in terms of your brand, when things get applied and used, do you see any do you have any takeaways or any like opinions about how you keep that inconsistency from happening? Like once you start using your brand and different departments start using the brand in different ways in PowerPoint slides or on the website or something else. Like do you have any tips or tricks to kind of keep that consistency that is so important for your brand to stay on message, on point?
Yeah, so defining those kind of key elements in a brand guideline or design system and really staying true to what has been established before, but at the same time making it in a way that it allows for exploration and um, really uh, having the elements flexible enough
Right,
to yeah, come up with new
right.
ideas and ways to explore the brand.
Keeping it fresh, yeah. So it's not too rigid.
Right.
Okay. In terms of like investing in branding, so there's obviously like there's an investment up front in terms of like defining your brand if you have nothing. How do you see like because being pragmatic about branding also like relates to budget or money spent or resources going into this thing? Do you see companies over investing in branding? And if so, like how do you kind of manage like where is the line? Where do we draw the line in terms of you as a startup, for example, having a certain amount of capital available? Some of it goes to branding, some of it goes to product, something goes to everything else. Like, do you see like a clear line in terms of okay, now this is enough for now?
I wouldn't, I don't know if there's a clear line, but you can definitely overinvest on branding if you go too heavy on the branding and marketing side and the product's not really there.
Yes.
Like the identity doesn't really reflect how the product operates. I
Right.
think that could cause some friction between the end user and the product. So maybe focusing on getting the core of you as a brand, the product, up to speed, and then um, using the branding to kind of help elevate the product itself.
Right. That makes sense. So when you see like the the product not being far enough ahead where like all the energy you spend on the branding and which potentially probably leads to some sort of sales because of brand awareness, people start using the product and then things kind of deteriorate or fall
Yeah, like
apart.
some companies like really try to seem bigger than they are,
Right.
and it's creating like this kind of false
Yeah.
perception of trust.
Yes.
Um, so just invest enough to make a good first impression in order to get the users interested in your product,
Yes.
and take it from there. But the product has to really reflect what you um project as a brand.
Right. Makes sense. So if you're all about high quality and like your brand really oozes, or you want it to ooze this sort of like we're the thing, like we're the
Mm.
hot thing, and then you start using the product and the product is a completely different reality, that's going to have a like a hard hit on your, as you say, like your the perception of the brand. And that's kind of difficult, I imagine, to like recoup from. Like it's kind
Yeah.
of difficult to get that trust back
Mm-hmm.
in a user or a consumer. Okay, that's a great point. We do you have anything in terms of, like, I have this last question, but I'm not sure how relevant it is. But I'm very curious in terms of like the course correction in terms of being pragmatic about your design. Or also, I imagine, means we set some goals that we want to achieve. We know what we want with this branding. We know who our users are, so we'd be very smart about approaching branding. But in case you get that wrong, like, do you have any insights or suggestions in terms of kind of getting back on track, course correcting, in case you missed the mark?
Yeah, right. I think it's all about making small incremental adjustments to like maybe your core messaging, um, trying to identify what what's not working and what's working and then adapting on that. So maybe trying do a split test
Yes.
if it's a feature for your product. Um, but if the brand is not working, then trying to focus on the smaller stuff before you go through a whole revamp. Try and isolate what's the stuff that's working from what's not working. So maybe user interviews and
Sure. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so the split testing thing, and that could be like through paid advertisement, for example. That's at least a more tangible way to do the split testing. See, is it a color thing? Is it a logo thing? Is it a communication thing? Change and try different things, or maybe you figure out it's a product thing or it's a website thing. I think split testing is a very interesting idea. Same thing as you would do with your product, with a feature.
mm.
So it makes sense to have that same pragmatic approach to kind of course correcting. When we look at branding, we sometimes see that things can, at least initially, can get a bit complex. And if I have my pragmatic hat on, like trying to be simplistic initially, even though it might seem a bit more generic, I don't know, might be better, at least short term. Do you have any, like, in terms of consistency over complexity, like, do you have any thoughts on that?
um well, consistency over complexity. Um, so staying consistent is the way to go
Yeah.
rather than being complex. A clear messaging and a clear, um, unique design language that you have to tap into in order to, you know, to stay different from the competitors or just for you to stand out as a brand is very important. So focusing on being consistent and that could be achieved with a flexible um kind of design system that or flexible identity that whether it's just a color a way a tone of voice that you use.
Yeah.
So just try and stay um just speaking again to the core elements of your brand, what you stand for, and relate to that.
Yeah. Exactly.
So not like fixating yourself as on a logo or whatever.
No. Now, if anything, I think, correct me if you disagree, but I think the logo might be one of the smallest, at least initially, one of the less important things. If I had to like consider some of the brands I see, like sure I might remember their logos, and I'm not talking about Nike or any like
Mm.
huge companies. I'm talking about smaller companies. like how they communicate, like the tone of voices is playful. Is it different than the rest in a very maybe conservative market? Like if I'm looking for insurances, I'm going to remember the one that sticks out in terms of
Yeah.
like playfulness
It
and
is, yeah, like you say, it's so people generally speaking have this is they think this is like your most memorable thing from a brand, but I would also disagree because you can even you say small company, big companies, but like a huge company like Coca-Cola, the whole brand is red, and they even turned Santa red. The Santa used to be green, and that was red, just thanks to Coca-Cola.
no way. Is that true?
It is true.
Okay.
It's true. And you see red and the shape of the bottle. That's very much their identity in
Secret.
itself. You
Yeah.
see those two elements together, it's Coca-Cola,
Yes,
right?
that's
So
true. And the same goes for like a little startup. Like I think if you can find that Coca-Cola shape and that Coca-Cola color, and that's very difficult, obviously.
yeah, no, you won't be able to do that. It's
No,
long. It's also about how long the brand has existed. So
of course.
they've had all this time to kind of establish themselves on the market.
Yeah.
If you start early on, like defining these, the core
Yes.
core of the identity, that will help you stir the brand in a way that will be it will stay memorable.
Right. Exactly. Of course. Because just going back to prop buying, because I think that relates a lot to not the Coca-Cola example, but just the whole be saying memorable example. Because as I remember clearly, initially you did a lot of research in terms of how the rest of the industry looked, related industries, but also specifically where prop binder is like a player and want to be part of like that market space. And we had like in Figma all these different like 12, 15 different website examples, just the homepage of these different brands. Like maybe one or two or three of them was interesting, like different, but the rest was just generic,
Mm.
which is fine. Like that makes sense to some extent, but that gave us the opportunity to try and make prop binder like different, like find that red Coca-Cola color
Mm.
in the indigo, in the purplish color we chose, because that wasn't really something we saw.
Yeah, definitely. Having an overview of who we up against gave us an edge to staying being different in the market, and definitely standing out from the the players that play it safe in a way.
Exactly.
Um, it also um took PropBinder, like took a lot of trust from PropBinder and us
Sure.
in order to execute that on that in a way that they will still be a competitor in the space.
Exactly.
Not everyone has that the courage
No.
to take that step in a different direction. And I mean, looking back on Prop by now, I think they took the chance, and they really excelled in the space.
Right. They really stand out clearly.
Right.
Like one thing is their product and everything around it, but also just how they look and feel.
Just as yeah, exactly how they talk and
Yes. How they communicate it. Yeah. I think that plays a big role. When you look at, like, if you had to give some very practical advice in terms of pragmatic branding, but branding in general, like, what are some of the more common branding mistakes you see in software companies, like early on?
I'd say um let's just imagine having this user journey where we find a website
Mhm.
that's it's a super cool product, looks super great. You log in, you sign up, you download the product, you try get to use the product, and then the product falls flat. Like the brand's not really reflected in the product itself, or it could be the other way around, or it could be that it looks completely different on all the different access points.
Mhm.
So inconsistencies in brand visuals, messaging, or even the how you use it. I think that's the mistake
Yeah.
in software companies and startups.
Yeah. Like not caring enough about, you think that the details, like not putting enough effort into getting all the small things right? Or is it about, I don't know, not having the right capabilities or resources to kind of make it good enough? Or,
Yeah, it could be a bit of both, not having the resources or skill set, or people just not caring because they might just care as on more on the product side,
sure.
how it operates. Very focused, if it's like a technical person,
Right,
like
sure.
an engineer, or
It's a different focus, yeah.
different focus, different
They undervalue it, I think.
undervalued aesthetics. So
Exactly, I think.
could be the other way around. You never know. So I'd say a bit of both.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think it's usually, in my experience anyway, that like once you see it like done the right way, or like the proper way, like in terms of the aesthetics and getting everything right, they know that this is the right thing. But
Mm,
I've experienced quite a few times that until they see it, they're not entirely sure like why it's not looking the right way.
yeah.
So I think that sometimes plays a role, at least. Well, I mean, it is difficult, so like getting that thing right. But it does kind of spoil, at least in my opinion, also when just using other products. Like it makes me feel like the quality of whatever I'm about to use, like the product in the end, is to the same standard as if the branding is not great, or if it's not reflected through the onboarding process or the sign up page or whatever. It feels like this is going to have an impact on the product. Like the same level of care has been put into the product. And if that's low on the branding or the first impression, as you spoke about earlier, it's going to rub off on the product experience for me, even before I've used it. So I think, to your point, like really caring about all those touch points, all those access points
Mm.
is very important from a branding perspective, because it carries a lot of weight in the end. Do you have any simple branding strategies for small teams on a very tight budget?
Um, Good strategy would be defining core elements of what you stand for. So define your brand values, your brand goals, your tone of voice, and really stick to those. Try and at least stick to what you've defined,
Mm-hmm.
and stay true to it, because um, that really builds trust with your customers. What if you can one day say you're sustainable, eco-friendly, and then the next day do the exact opposite?
Sure.
So honing that that really hones the trust of a user.
Yes, that's true. Anything else on that topic?
Everything. Mhm.
Oh, it's great, man.
Maybe on that topic, defining being flexible
Mhm.
with your design manual design system.
To your point, though, if we look at one of like some of the recent projects we've done where we've been very pragmatic about it because resources or whatever it might be, the things you usually like define is there's some sort of vibe, like general vibe that we're trying to establish, because with the backstage example, for example, we have a very capable person in the other end who's going to work with this, right? So we're trying to establish the vibe, we're trying to establish the foundational aspects of it, which of course is a logo, the type, the colors, some sort of pattern. Usually there's some sort of third visual element. And that kind of, at least in my mind, is a very like simple approach to at least the tangibles.
Yeah, so defining the initial kind of core building elements, like the visuals, um, for for someone that maybe doesn't have the same capabilities as us, but then is able to use them and really make it feel like
Mm,
they're doing something with it.
sure.
So I think that's choosing the right typeface, colors, and being allowing them for explore and kind of immerse themselves in that, in those building blocks. And
For sure. Yes. Also making sure that the outcome is somewhat feels consistent. Again, to your point, just being very strict about those building blocks, and then we have something
yeah,
to work with and build on top of. I think we came about the pragmatic branding pretty well, like in terms of like getting the tangibles and the foundational stuff right, still being a bit flexible, but try to systematize it a bit. Being resourceful about how you approach, like when enough is enough in terms of branding, because you also have other things you need to invest your time and money into. And one of the worst things you could do is make it too complex initially. I think focus too much on the logo, or focus too much on the branding, so that everything else kind of feels like untruthful. Like the product experience is nothing like the branded experience, if that makes sense.
yeah,
I
agree.
think that roughly wraps it up. I like that. This is essentially the last episode of this season,
Season 1,
as we call it, exactly. 8 episodes, kind of going about a lot of the stuff we focus on day to day and help our clients with. It's not set in stone yet, but I think there's going to be season 2 where we elevate a bit. We move to some new offices, which is going to have maybe some more space, some more dedicated space for doing this kind of stuff. And we might invite some people on and we might mix it up a bit. We don't know yet, but this is kind of like the wrapping up episode of a very good season, talking about a lot of interesting stuff. We also got some merch now, which is also a good indicator that it's not coming to an end.
No.
This is just the beginning, actually. So stay tuned for that. A lot of interesting stuff coming. Thank you much for listening out there. Thank you to Philippa for handling all the stuff behind the scenes. Thank you for Oscar for joining me.
Thank you for being here.